Hey, hello everyone and welcome to Extreme Graphics Tech. My name is Angelo and well, there is a thing happening in the world of PC graphics or well, graphics in general where when you name the words reconstruction, upscaling, checkerboard or DLFSR or DLSS, a lot of people get itchy like oh my goodness, I don't want that. And a lot of people are like they want those raw pixel count. They don't want stuff being upscaled, reconstructed, IA, EA, BC, ZD, or anything that has, to do with not like the perfect count. What I mean is that they want to play at native resolution because native resolution is always better. So of course if that's you, good for you, and I hope you have the money to invest in the hardware necessary, but I like to take advantage of every single thing that companies throw at me in order to try to squeeze as much performance as possible. So while I was doing a video that is going to be published later about the RTX 2060 and the 6GB of VRAM, the thing is that while I was testing, I realized that I was testing the games at 1080p because I think that the 2060 is more of a 1080p card. So I was testing most games at 1080p. But then some games I decided to also test at 1440p, which obviously made them lose a lot of performance. But then activating DLSS, sometimes in quality mode and sometimes in balance mode, depending on the game, for some reason it didn't work out exactly the same, which I think it will depend on what it's doing on the underhood. So not always is resolution dependent because there are other things happening. But anyway, sometimes just activating the DLSS quality at 1440p or DLSS balance, I will have the same performance at 1080p native. So I was wondering, okay, so if I can use DLSS to have the same performance of 1080p native, will it be better for me to play a 1440p DLSS in terms of image quality, or is it better to keep 1080p native? Because after all, if you're reconstructing for an inferior resolution, in this case 1080p from DLSS quality or even less when you're using balance mode, obviously it would be better to play at 1080p, or at least that's according to many of the people who have this itchiness when you mention any DLSS or reconstruction software or system or hardware or anything that at the end of the day is not raw pixel count. I don't know, they care a lot about that. I don't really care how those pixels are on my screen as long as they are as fast as possible and they look good. So I don't care if one pixel is true and the 99% of pixels are made up. As long as it makes sense, it looks good, I'm happy with that. So that's what it took, what brought me to start testing this situation. So you're going to see a series of images and a couple of videos about comparing 1080p native against 1440p DLSS quality and 1440p DLSS balance, so we can see at the end of the day, if you had to choose a resolution because you have a 1440p monitor and you decide you want the performance of 1080p or the performance that you got 1080p, will it be better to just play at 1080p, or it would be better to play at 1440p with some kind of reconstruction? And these are my results. Okay, let's start this comparison with the Plague Tale Requiem. Evidently, each game is going to have a different image output. Some games are going to be softer, some games are going to be more detailed, so the effect is not always going to be exactly the same. However, right now we can see the three images. We are always going to have the 1080p native image on the left, the DLSS quality in the middle, and the DLSS balance at 1440p, these two on the right. So if we get a close-up, we can already see here how the details are evidently more clear at 1440p quality and 1440p balance than it is at 1080p native. So if you had to choose, I will no doubt choose to play at 1440p DLSS as long as the performance is the same as 1080p. So that's important to notice. That's what I have been found. So let's just give a check to this thing here. I'm not quite sure what it is. It seems something for the wine. I don't know how it's called in English. However, you can see here that the texture is not, you are not able to discern the texture, what is more than clear in the 1440p upscale quality, even though the internal resolution from where both are rendering is much lower than 1080p. Yes, it's lower than 1080p in both situations. So as you can see here, each one of the details is more defined, especially for the fine detail, because this is a game with a quite a soft image. But if we go up here on the distance, you can see that this castle over here also, you can, you know, the details are very soft, while here there are more detail on both images. So in the case of A Plague Tale Requiem, it's evident that it's better to play at 1440p with DLSS than at 1080p native. Okay, so now we are going to test the same in Dying Light 2. Now I have to say, Dying Light is one of those games that doesn't benefit too much from resolution. I mean, obviously the more resolution, the game is going to look a little bit crispier, but because of the output of the image, this game tends to be like a dirty image, very noisy, because, well, you know, it has a certain aspect or look to it. However, we can see that 1440p is resolving more details than the 1080p image native. So when we check this, for example, we can see that this metallic door here, it doesn't resolve any of the details, where we can see, even if it's not perfect, more details in the 1440p image that we could in the 1080p native image. Remember, this is DLSS quality and this is DLSS balance, and in both cases we can have more details in these two than we have at 1080p. So if we go up, also just to show you what I'm saying here, if we go to this 3, we can see that this is more a smudge, is not very detailed, while the 1440p image is a lot more detailed than the 1080p image, and that goes as well for the DLSS balanced version. Now, if we get even closer here, let's look at this roof. Here we can't discern anything. We know it's something green here, but we don't really know what exactly is composing this. When we go to the 1440p image, we can see that the texture is supposed to be like some sort of brick, right, that is making the roof, so that we can see more detail. This is interesting because this is, you know, this image is 1080p native, so from where is 1440p reconstructing and getting these more details, considering that it's starting from an image that it looks similar or even under this, then it's quite interesting, if you ask me, how this is getting to that point, or where it's actually getting out those details that we cannot even see in the 1080p image, like here on the door as I showed before. Another example of what I'm saying is this guy here, which is not perfect on by any stretch of the imagination. It's very far, so obviously it's not going to look very detailed. However, we can see when we get close that it's more detailed on the 1440p. The reconstructed image is much more detailed than it was before. So yeah, as you can see, even on a sort of very rough image like Dying Light 2, the 1440p, the DLSS version, is a lot better than the 1080p image. So in Spider-Man Miles Morales, the game doesn't really benefit for more resolution, at least not from 1080p to 1440p. There are some better details and so on, but however, like this, as you can see, where the bushes at the end look more detailed here than it does in the 1080p images, which, well, you know, that's exactly what we're looking, but it's not like a night and day change. However, there are the curious difference that is funny to point out here. This is what I'm trying to show. Look at this like little grass in here that is supposed to be in here. As you can see, it's not resolved at all at the 1080p native when it comes out of the black areas. You can see here in the red one, but it shows, but when it comes to this area, it's just not resolved. While here you can see that this is a much more detailed, even on the DLSS balance 1440p. Another difference that you can see here is the fact that this texture and this area here and this shadow, it looks different here. It looks more like there is more details in the textures in both of the DLSS version of it, and the shadow is like more, it's harsh, it's more strong. I don't know if this is a result of the ray tracing pad, you know, having to have more rays, which shouldn't, considering that the internal resolution at which this thing is working is essentially 1080p, while you know, then reconstructing. So it's quite interesting, the end result. However, let's see another Spider-Man comparison. Okay, now having a comparison of Spider-Man now with in a busier area with more details, at first look there doesn't seem to be too many difference. However, if we start to getting close and trying to check some of those differences, they start to become more apparent. For example, on this building you can see that there is no way for you to actually see what is exactly these windows, while on the DLSS quality and balance version you can clearly discern that these are separate windows and they are individual ones. If you see this crane here in the 1080p, it barely blends and blurry and disappears with the background, while the DLSS quality version is a lot better and more defined. Even the balance version, even though this one is a lot more blurry than the quality version in this case, but it's still better than the 1080p version. If we keep going over here, we can see some details. So you see all of this tower here is more clear on the 1440p DLSS version than it is in the other one. However, we can see here that this one becomes blurry almost as much as the 1080p, a little bit more defined maybe, but not by a big chance. So even here in this communication tower or a lighting tower, you can see that the 1080p version is quite blurry, but it's more detailed here. So even on this very busy area of Spider-Man, you can see that there is a game by playing this at 1440p with DLSS balance or quality than playing at 1080p native. Now let's just see a video, because many of you may be thinking, yeah, it's easy to say that when you're just showing images, but what when the game is in movement? Now, by testing this video here, you can see what I'm saying. Look at how the 1080p image is is a lot less stable than the 1440p balance version, because this is not even in quality mode. This is 1440p balance, and still the image is a lot more stable than the 1080p native image, which is, of course, it has a lot to do with the temporal anti-alias version that the game is using, but this shows you that there is obviously more to gain by playing with DLSS at a higher resolution and lowering the quality until you get the same kind of performance than play at native resolutions. If we get close to this, you can see that what I'm saying is completely more stable, the 1440p image. You can see here that the crane here is, just trembling, flickering, and you can barely see it. Here you can see more clearly the effect of this crane, and it's much more stable. The image doesn't flick like that. There are some compromises, because if you see these birds flying, they have this tendency to kind of over sharp during the movement and create some ghosting, but I would say that I would prefer that, because it's very occasional and it only happens when those birds are on screen, than by having this constantly be flickering by the resolution. Now, if we try a game like Cyberpunk, which, as you can see, is a game that has a very particular output image, like very dirty, very rough, even then you can see some how the benefits of using 1440p DLSS. In this case, here, what this is electrifies Verge, or I'm not quite sure, but you can see that it's more complete on the 1440p version. You can see everything about it. Even here in the crosswalk, you can see that it keeps the line, the yellow and black lines, no problems whatsoever. It starts to become like one yellow blurriness in here. Now, also here, you see this effect. These are diagonal lines, but at some point, because of the resolution, it starts looking like some sort of semicircular thing, a very weird effect. Now, if you look at the 1440p versions, both of them, the balance and quality, they look diagonal up to the very end of the image. So that's a very good. If we go here, also, you can see this light. Here, you see that it's a light, and you see some squares, but here you can understand better the material and the shading of this, making it look like some sort of glass, a square little thing. Well, it's hard to discern from this image here. So as you can see, even a game like Cyberpunk, that it has a very rough sort of quality, can make better use of DLSS than it does of native 1080p. So at that point, once again, from my point of view, it would be better to play a 1440p quality or balance, depending on the performance you're getting. As I said, some games are going to be, with DLSS balance of quality at 1440p, get the same performance as 1080p native, but some other games require for you to go down to 1440p balance. And for the last comparison I'm going to bring today is from an old game that has recently received like a very big update, which is the Witcher 3 Next Gen update, which brings ray tracing, DLSS, and all the goodies. So I thought, well, what's with this game? So as you can see here, the 1080p image and 1440p image looks very much alike. There is not a lot of difference, and in fact, if you check this globe here, I will say that the 1080p image tends to look a little bit better with more detail than the 1440p image. However, I think that's the only advantage I can clearly see, because when we start getting close to them, you can see that the 1440p image, for example, here on the pebbles on the road, is more clear, more defined than the version at 1080p. Also, if we see this old tree here, you can see that there are a lot more branches that have become part of this tree than you can see here, because they become like a blurry mess and you cannot really see that many branches in here. If we go a little bit over this area, we can also see that the 1440p version of the DLSS game is a lot more clear when it comes to the texture of the tower compared to the 1080p version, where you cannot really make each one of the rocks that make the image. Not that it is important in terms of gameplay or anything, it's not going to affect. Obviously, what I'm saying is that the DLSS version, from my point of view, tends to have more clarity, and that can also be checked here with this tree on the background, and it's a lot more blurry here. Of course, you may like better the blurry version than the more a sharp version. But if you want more proof, let's check this little house on the background. You can see here that you can clearly see each one of the wood pieces that make the this part of the house, while here is just less it's harder to be able to make the difference between them. And the same goes for the brick wall under the house that you can clearly see over here, and here it becomes more of a blurry mess. Also, this person here fishing, minding his own business. I'm me picking and looking at people I shouldn't, but he is fishing. And this one, well, I'm not sure if he's fishing because I cannot see what he's actually doing, because I cannot see what he is holding, but I can on the 1440p version. It's more clear and is clear as day that he is fishing. This one may be doing something else. I'm not quite sure what could be. Anyway, the whole point of these presentations was to show you some of this difference and why I think that 1440p is a better quality DLSS than even 1080p native. Well, as you can see, at least from my point of view, I will play 1440p DLSS any day of the week over 1080p. Yes, there are some situations. I just showed you mostly images, and many of you are going to say, yeah, but in movement the situation is different and there is ghosting and so other things. Well, we show, for example, in Spider-Man that the image with DLSS is a lot more stable. Yes, there are other defects like the flickering that happening because of the disocclusion while the pigeons were flying. For example, there's a little bit of shimmering when they are moving around. But if you ask me, I would prefer that little inconvenience that is only on the screen when you have those pigeons like in front of you or in a very particular situation. And also, I was zooming a lot, than to have the 1080p image which was flickering all the time. And in all the other ones that we tested, I always thought that the DLSS version always looked better. It resolved more detail. So if I had to choose between playing a 1080p native or 1440p DLSS, there is no contest for me. I would prefer the 1440p reconstructed image, upscale image, AI image, in this case using DLSS, than any other thing. I understand maybe it's not the same for FSR, it's not the same for XESS or any other reconstruction, but in this particular case we are testing DLSS against native. And yes, I know 1440p, many of you will say I would prefer 1440p native than any of the other two, and that's another discussion. Yes, it's like that, for those that love the raw pixel count, that's obviously going to always be better because it's going to be the real pixel. However, if you are someone who at 1080p you get the performance you're looking for, but when you go to 1440p you don't get it, well, I would say that I would prefer to play a 1440p DLSS than a 1080p native. If you're going to play a 1080p native, then maybe even still you can use DLSS to go over the resolution, and then if your monitor allows to do that on sampling, or in this case use DLA, which will allow for you the machine learning anti-alias or something, deep learning anti-alias or something like that it means. So in this case it will render internally over using DLA, and then it's going to downsample to your resolution. So you can do that. There is option on the NVIDIA control panel. What I'm trying to say at the end of the day is that from my point of view, you know, using all the tools you have at hand to get that performance you want, and as I said, if you get at 1080p, you get the 16 frames that you're per second that you're looking for. But when you go to 1440p, you get 40 frames per second. Still, if you use DLSS quality or balance depending on the game, and you recover those frames that you lost, and you get to your 60 FPS per second as a standard, then that will look much better than just playing at 1080p native. So that is what I will do. And well, you know, this was just an example of the games I tested. There are probably games that maybe look worse, but I don't think that's honestly going to be a case unless it's a very old DLSS game, because mostly what I can see is that it's much better to play DLSS even balanced quality in terms of image clarity than at 1080p native that we were testing. So that was a curiosity that I stumbled up and at the end of the day I was curious and I wanted to test it, and I find it very interesting, you know, to know these sort of things if you like graphics. So I hope you like it, find it interesting too, and as always, see you on the next video.